Hi there. As mentioned, I'm Sapphire and I'm engineer with EngineerBetter. I spend a lot of time working with technologies like Concourse, Bosch and Cloud Foundry, but before I started in my current role, I'd never heard of any of these things. I only had an abstract understanding of what they even were. In the early days, alongside a need to get to grips with these new tools, I had this little fear that would always creep in. And this was something that started before I even began my role. And this was a fear that I would break everything. Whilst a lot of people could potentially break things in production, in the world of distributed systems, this could be catastrophic. A delete job in a Concourse pipeline could tear down every component of a Cloud Foundry deployment, and with it, every single running application. I came to learn that this feeling wasn't a unique one that I had. So I turned to my ragtag group of fellow juniors who were working across a number of different organizations and found on a daily basis, they went to work terrified. This isn't good for anyone. When people are scared or worried or nervous, the task at hand is a lot harder. In an investigation into anxiety, individuals who didn't have anxiety disorders took part in a working memory task called an NBAC task. They viewed a sequence of cards and were asked whether the card they were viewing was the same as the card N cards back, NBAC. However, on some runs of this task, they were told they might receive an electric shock. When the threat of a shock was looming, their performance was significantly worse. Now I know what you're thinking. Sapphire, no one's being told they might get shocked while they're at work. And to that I say no one that you know of. And also, when it comes to physical threats and social threats, our brains are activated in very similar ways, suggesting that on a cognitive level, we can compare the threat of an electric shock to that of a dressing down. What this study and studies of its ilk tell us is that fear and anxiety about all things contribute to our cognitive load. That's the amount of effort used in your working memory. If you're scared that you could destroy a production environment with just a few keystrokes, that's less resources allocated to learning new things and to effective decision making to ensure that you don't delete the production database. In a real-life illustration, medical researchers discovered that when healthcare professionals are under greater cognitive load, they make poorer medical decisions and fall back on stereotypes about patients to inform their care. But that's not to say anxiety... Oh, you can't...
It's hard to hear.
Sorry. Is this okay?
Yeah.
But that's not to say anxiety and fear don't ever serve a purpose. They ensure a state of readiness. If you have reason to be scared, it's best that you're not unprepared for the rumble. But if you're writing code sitting at your desk, chances are this serves very little purpose. Fortunately, my terror was short-lived. As during a pairing session very early on, someone on my team said, "If you type something that might break things, I'll tell you." Within a pair, engineers have scoped to articulate a solution and get feedback on their approach immediately. At last year's Pipeline Conf, Elizabeth Hendrickson delivered a keynote that focused on feedback cycles. In this talk, she pointed out there are different levels of feedback that detect bugs and as a result produce better software. With the greatest latency, furthest down the line, we have customer feedback or customer reactions. And with the least latency, you had feedback from a pairing partner or a mob conspirator. There are things that humans won't always catch, not due to a lack of understanding, but because we're fallible. That's where our unit tests come in, protecting us against ourselves. And for our newbies, they have the chance to test out an approach and see what it looks like. They can bring the knowledge they've gained elsewhere and see how compatible it is with the current system. If you're pairing with someone who's articulated an approach and you have a feeling it won't work but you're not sure why, it's beneficial for both of you to see the outcome, even if it is a failing test, because there's merit in seeing those error messages. They provide insight into how a tool, project, or language work. Sitting between our pairing feedback and our customer feedback, we have our continuous integration. And at a fundamental level, this involves checking code into a shared repository, and when code is committed, it's built, tested, and engineers get feedback about whether any problems were detected. When using tools like Concourse, one approach to make is to have different pipelines for development and production code. The more similar the environments, the better. Only when the code runs down your development pipeline does it appear in production. So there's no need to go through a number of other convoluted systems and go through manual steps to ensure that there's a path to production. Any changes, if approved by a pairing partner, pass unit tests, and travel down one or more pipelines, can end up in production. The team can deliver their software continuously. This isn't to say that people shouldn't have to think whilst writing their code. It's that CI and CD tools give team members, particularly the new ones, the freedom to focus on the problem at hand without being consumed by worry. I'm sure many people here have testing and CI implemented at some level, and this isn't a suggestion that CI/CD will solve all of the problems, that new people will immediately feel comfortable talking, contributing, and experimenting with the codebase. And that's because factors like trust and psychological safety in a team will still factor in, regardless of how many tools you have in place. That innovative solution may never be articulated during a pairing session if team members think the risks of saying something are too high. Psychological safety refers to how people think about what will happen if they take a risk, how other people will respond if they dare put themselves out there by contributing a new idea, delivering feedback, or shining a spotlight on something that isn't working or could work better. Will shooting their shot result in shame, embarrassment, or criticism? Less time is spent dwelling on this question in teams with high psychological safety. Looking into error rates at hospitals, researchers collected data from 2 teaching hospitals that were part of the same medical school. They found that within teams where team members felt that speaking up about potential errors was natural and necessary, there were lower rates of medication errors. There was a relationship between psychological safety and patient care. But what does this look like? How do we make teams psychologically safe? The team benefits from people admitting their wrongs. Team members who hear other team members, particularly those in leadership positions, admit that they made a mistake are more likely to remember this when they make mistakes and feel comfortable bringing them up. If leaders are available and approachable, this reduces the perceived barriers that stand in the way of discussing both the positive and the negative. At the other end of the spectrum, if leaders are not approachable, team members are more likely to feel that their opinions aren't welcomed or valued and don't share their concerns or suggestions. Leaders who ask team members for input are more likely to foster team psychological safety. Soliciting feedback suggests to others that their opinion is respected and makes active participation within the team the norm. The original title of this talk was Freedom to be Vulnerable, and it primarily focused on the vulnerability of new team members. But as I investigated further, I came to realize that the vulnerability of other team members was just as important to developing new ones. For new staff to be able to experiment and make mistakes, they need the freedom to do so and to be trusted to do so without being surveilled. And for this to be the case, more senior staff members need to exercise vulnerability and trust their staff and their systems. So in summary, everyone benefits from the contributions and even the mistakes of new team members, and CI/CD, but not only CI and CD, can help pave the way for this. New team members provide new perspectives and ask the questions that established team members haven't thought of, because they are innovators, not liabilities. Thank you.